What's going on, y'all? Welcome to Raise the Bar, elevated conversations around entrepreneurship, capital raising, and real estate. I'm your host, Seth Bradley. What if the highest cash flowing real estate strategy available right now isn't multifamily? It isn't house flipping, and it isn't what your financial advisor has ever told you about. Fill in the blank. Today's guest grew up in extreme poverty in Peru, lost everything in a failed business, rebuilt everything from zero, and has since built a short-term rental empire, generating over $8 million annually on Airbnb alone, with $25 million in assets under management. He turned mid-sized single-family homes into world-class experiential vacation rentals. He runs a fund, he coaches, he syndicates, and he and his wife run it all together. If you've ever wondered whether short-term rentals are a real wealth-building strategy or just a side hustle, or if they're dying in today's market, this conversation is about to change the way you think. Let's get into it. What's up, builders? This is Raise the Bar Radio, where we talk about building wealth, raising capital, and all in all, raising the bar in your business and your life. This is the No BS podcast for capital raisers, investors, and entrepreneurs who are serious about scaling their business and living life on their own terms. I'm Seth Bradley, securities attorney, real estate investor, and entrepreneur, bringing you world-class strategies from the best in the game. If you're ready to raise more capital, close bigger deals, build a better you, and create true financial freedom, you're in the right place. Let's go. Today on Raise the Bar, we've got my friend George Salas, CEO and founder of Empress Capital, serial entrepreneur, fund manager, STR, investing coach, and one of the most influential operators in the short-term rental space. George grew up in underserved Peru, built and lost businesses, and ultimately found his lane in experiential short-term rentals, now managing over $25 million in assets, teaching others how to build six-figure STR portfolios. George, my man, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate that. You know, it's been a long journey, and super excited to be here. So I appreciate you having me, and I'm glad to see you a couple weeks ago at Best Ever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great seeing you in person. It's always good to shake hands with people and have a face-to-face conversation, especially in this world where we're always on Zoom or video calls, and that's kind of how relationships are built and maintained nowadays, which is crazy. So it's awesome to shake your hand and have some conversations with you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. So yeah, man, let's get started.
Let's go, man. So, a lot of people, this is an easy question, but for folks like us, sometimes it's a little bit harder. When somebody comes up to you on the street or you have a conversation with a stranger and they ask you what you do, what do you tell them?
Well, I tell them that I'm a short-term rental operator building a agentic hospitality infrastructure. So we buy the assets, acquire them, underwrite them in-house, renovate them, and then design them and launch them, right? So we raise the capital, we go find the deals, and then we operate them, right? We raise money from investors, and we take that, and essentially we love to create experiential short-term rental portfolios.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. And, you're not just, buying one property and turning grandma's house into an Airbnb. You've got a full-blown fund business that you're raising capital into. Tell us a little bit more about kind of the structure around that. I mean, everybody understands Airbnbs and what they are because they've stayed in one, but tell us about kind of the business of running a portfolio of Airbnbs.
Yeah, absolutely. When we first got started, it was just one deal at a time, putting our own cash back almost 9 years ago, right? And 2022, my wife and I were like, how are we going to really scale, right? And how are we really going to meet our goals and fulfill our dreams? And we just, realized that, you've got to not just put the effort and execution, but use, capital, equity, debt, other people's money, right? And that thought started crossing my mind about 4 years ago, and that's when I went all in. As an operator, I've ran short-term rentals for many years. I've launched over 130 of them. And I didn't know anything about raising capital or putting a fund together, so I went into Raise Masters where you and I met, right? And I stayed there for 3 years. It was a great mastermind, with Hunter being a fantastic person. His entire team of coaches and fund managers pretty much walked me through how to launch this fund. It's also, I went through a course from Fund Launch, from Bridger Pennington, and that one was legit. It was very basic. I didn't join their group, but that was the beginning. It was just an idea on how to scale, so I went deep for about a year and a half without doing anything. I just obviously paid my tuition there, and then I did a deposit for the fund. But it went 9 months went, and I was still trying to figure out what I needed to do in terms of the structures, the prefs, the economics, the numbers, and it was a whole nother world. It still is, right? And for me, it was, how do we best serve not just the properties, the operations, and win, but now you've got a whole nother audience to really care about, right? It's your partners, your investors. How do we serve both at the same time while winning, right? And, that's why it took me so long, because I wanted to find the right structure. So every day for about 8 to 9 months, I was going to about 3 to 4 coaching calls where I was just asking all the coaches how they put their fund together, right, and how they structured it. And then I was going back and doing a very in-depth competitive market research, finding out what my competitor funds were doing, right? What are these other guys raising 70, 80 million dollars, 250 million dollars, right? There's a company that's raised 250 million dollars. They're now a platform, and they do short-term vacation rentals, and that was the start. And for me, it was about evaluating what can make us different. Our model was already turning different 4 years ago, but I wanted to create something even better, right? So the outcome for that is creating Empress Capital, which we launched about 2.5 to 3 years ago, which would be the ops company part of the model that we run now, right? Before, we were a property manager and an investor. Today, we run a dual model with an ops company called Empress Capital, and then Empress Vacation Rentals being the design/property manager, right, that manages in-house. So we are vertically integrated in that sense. And 8-9 months later, realized that, this is a much harder game than I thought. So not just putting the fund together, but there was pitch decks. You had to build a full financial model, right? And that financial model took us 2 months to just get the foundation, then another 2 months to really refine it and do it specifically with, single assets. So we have a financial model that can hold up to 60 properties at once, right? And 60 single family short-term vacation rentals, right? So then it was about refining all of our assets and just figuring out, how do we create a moat, something very different than what everybody else is doing, right? And I had to go deep into marketing. I had to really understand what language we could use. And we ended up creating, a 506C, which is obviously a fund that a fund that allows accredited investors, and you can market on social media, even though we don't market heavily yet. So we ended up creating that, and we came up with, first wanted to do a $5 million fund. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool, $5 million fund. And then we ended up actually doing a 10 with a 15 million cap. So our fund is up to 15 million, and it has, essentially, it's all short-term vacation rentals. And our first portfolio in that fund is a portfolio we're buying in St. Louis. Currently, we've raised and deployed right under $3 million since inception of raising capital, right? And we're loving it, man. We're loving it in a sense that we've learned everything, and I could do it with my eyes closed now, right? But it was the most prolonged and insane process. ever. That PPM, I didn't even mention reviewing the 98-page document word by word to make sure that the Bible we created was the right document, right? So we went back and forth. That was another 4 months within those 8 months, So believe it or not, this is one of the hardest things I've done, and I would do many things differently today. But the experience of just going through that and really taking my time without rushing to create a product that would be different, right? I already had the process of how to operate that. So then we came up with the fund. Then originally it was a blind pool where investors could just throw in their money into a bucket. We had no assets in there, so it was very difficult to raise capital. When it really changes, when we changed it to a multi-asset or customizable vehicle, and in which you could invest into a portfolio, we could acquire the portfolio, and then you could treat that as a sell of a series LLC per se, right? So that's what we have now. We have a customizable fund. We have two, but this is the first one, right? We haven't launched the second one. And then somebody can come in and invest just into this portfolio, and they see the assets, they see the economics and numbers. And we ended up creating 3 different classes of shares, 1 for retail investors and 2 for strategic partners or fund managers. Right. So, and then today great timing for this, brother, because yesterday I secured a full commitment of $3 million that I worked on for 45 days from a group. Right. And
let's go.
I'm super excited about that. Right. So that's the process, man. It's very time consuming, but I hope that was clear enough and high level enough without getting into the weeds.
Yeah, man, that was fantastic. There's so much to unpack there, dude. But you are so detail oriented, and I saw your pitch deck early on, and I was like, man, this is incredibly detailed and professional and well thought out, and you could just tell that you put so much time and effort into that, and it wasn't just kind of this, let's just throw a 15-page pitch deck together and put it out there. I mean, you went meticulously through that process and came out with this extraordinary pitch deck that was really ready for institutional capital. I mean, it is that good. I was like, wow, this is really impressive. So that just goes to show you to the audience out there what George has been able to accomplish. How did you get over that hump? I'm going to rewind back to this. How did you get over the hump from self-educating, right? You said you were part of Fund Launch with Bridger Pennington, who I just had on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Raise Masters with Hunter, who I have a really good relationship with him. He's an incredible marketer. How did you get over that hump? Because a lot of people get stuck there. Like they get stuck with self-educating, joining a mastermind, going to meetups, and they just never really take that action. How did you get over that?
Well, it has to be built inside you, right? So you've got to have that drive that nothing and no one can stop the journey you're on. You're going to be successful no matter what. And failures are always coming your way. They could be a little, they could be big. And there was many big humps, right? The biggest one was figuring out what was the right product. So my hump was in creating clarity up here, right? And not having clarity, but then getting over that was creating clarity. And then it came, Seth, by spending very in-depth time with these coaches who've done it many times before, taking and then comparing 4, 5, 6 different ways to structure it, right? And then making a decision on what's going to work for you. Now, the first time that I launched it, it didn't work. Right. So, and that was the blind pool, right? A new fund manager, has ran a portfolio before, has scaled, his short-term rental, investments with I've got a portfolio with my wife. I've done it with investors prior to the fund as well, right? But single assets. And it was just about making a decision, right? You've got to pick something and then hope that what you picked, you did enough research, you actually did the competitive analysis. I spent probably easily 50 hours researching others, from listening to books, looking at every single piece of their website, every link, everything, right? Understanding what their model is and why they were winning. What gives them the edge, right? That was the competitive analysis that I did. And listening to books, for example, capital raising from Richard Wilson, right? His competitive analysis chapter in the capital raising book that he's launched a few years ago is very, very strategic. And that book is just strategic overall of how to scale a company, through raising capital, right? And so that was one of the hits. Okay, I'm not doing enough research. I don't understand enough about who I'm competing against. So I went back and redid that, right? And then I put all that into paper in an executive summary. And that became the foundation for the deck. And that deck got refined in about 80 to 100 hours. Those are the time that we spent on it, even though we spent $7,000 for someone to just create it for us, make it look great. We went and just detailed every part of it. And then since then, I've spent probably another 20 to 30 hours to make it even more institutional than it was before, right? So the hump was making that decision, pushing the trigger, not stopping. And when the other failure came, when we couldn't raise capital, right, in the first 6 months, it was about pivoting immediately. Money loves speed, Seth, right? It does not wait for you. So when you see something that needs to be changed because of the education that you have and the knowledge that you've built up here, as a CEO, what needs to be changed, right? So we made that decision quickly, right? In a matter of just a few weeks. Okay, this is not working. We've tried this, it didn't work. We tried that, it didn't work. Let's pivot. We pivoted. A few months later, it's working. And that was the just overcoming of that challenge, right? And today, we are, as of yesterday, about to be fully subscribed in our fund, or we are actually fully subscribed, just the money hasn't arrived, right? So that's a great feeling to have, and we're doing it right. And like Greg Cardone says, Seth, and I don't mean to keep going with this, but he says specifically that anything you do in life, no matter if it is your family, your marriage, your kids, your work, your business, your health, it's going to take 10 times longer, and it's going to take you 10 times the effort and 10 times the money. So don't ever underestimate that, because everybody else says it's easy. It is not easy, but you've got to keep going and never stop.
Pardon the interruption, but we don't do ads. Instead, know that if you're raising capital for real estate, my law firm, Raise Law, is here to give you the expert legal guidance you need to raise capital compliantly and structure and close your deal. And if you're looking for a done-for-you fund-to-fund solution, TribeVest is the industry's only all-in-one setup and fund administration solution. Visit raise.law and tribevest.com to learn more. Man, that's fantastic, dude. Yeah, it's never easy. Like, if you think whatever this big idea is that you have, whether that's raising capital into a fund or buying a apartment building, whatever it is, that it's going to be easy, you are mistaken, right? Like, anything worthwhile is hard to do, and that's why it's worthwhile. What I'm hearing from you is curiosity, dude. You've always had curiosity. You're continuing to learn and build and looking at people that have already done what you want to do and just taking all the best parts of that, and you're just constantly learning and also taking decisive action, right? Like, that's kind of how you got over the hump. Like, you are taking decisive action. Real quick, what do you think the difference is between taking that decisive action, seeing something maybe that's not working, pivoting very quickly, making a decision and doing something different, versus chasing shiny objects? Because a lot of us entrepreneurs kind of get into that. Those are kind of two somewhat opposing ideas, but how do you kind of reconcile the difference there?
Well, I focus, relentless focus, right? And it's not about giving up or switching. You're always going to have to pivot as an entrepreneur. Every single month, every single year, right? Tracking your performance and what you're building. I listened to Darren Hardy's, it was a 6-minute Darren Daily, and one of his main points, this is a couple weeks ago, one of his main points was, don't create a 5-year business plan with a 3-year setup and in a 3-year map. Just track monthly, quarterly, and yearly, and pivot as it comes, because no matter what, companies have spent dozens of thousands of, or maybe even millions of dollars to create this big 10-year plan, but that plan is never ever going to go as planned, right? So for me, it's been about really focusing relentlessly, not giving up on that thing and just pivoting when necessary. But the decision to pivot is the biggest thing. Sometimes people don't ever pivot, and that's why they fail, right? So making that decision, I would say Tony Robbins at his best. Take massive action and pivot when necessary, right? That's the biggest thing when it comes to building a business for me, right? It's taking the massive action and changing when needed.
Yeah, I love that, man. Yeah, you've got to take massive action, whether you're quoting Tony Robbins or quoting Grant Cardone. It's kind of the same message, right? 10x, taking massive action, making decisive decisions quickly, right? Because even if you're wrong, at least you have speed, right? At least you can see the result and see what happens, and then you're like, oh shit, maybe that wasn't the right decision, but I can pivot now because I already know that that's the wrong direction. So let's go the other way, right? And you've already eliminated it, where other people might just sit there and think and ask and try to figure things out and kind of over educate, and they never take any action. They're never going to know right versus wrong until you get in there and just do it, right? So you've got to be able to take massive action. You've got to be decisive quickly, and then you can iterate. You can iterate and move forward quickly and build and grow as fast as you've been able to grow. Anything about kind of the mindset shift as you've went from, doing one at a time STR properties, using your own money, then going to that $5 million fund that you said you initially wanted to do. And then you realize, like, oh man, I'm going to go bigger, right? And then going to a $15 million fund. And I'm sure now you're thinking like, oh, maybe we're going to go to a $50 million fund or $100 million fund, right? Like what does that kind of look like mentally for people that, maybe aren't quite there yet?
I would say create so much clarity first that it just becomes obvious, right? Brendon Burchard says the success of people at their end of the lifetime is actually measured on their ambitions, right? So if you're ambitious, and you can't create ambition without education and clarity, right? But if you're ambitious, like I'm extremely ambitious, I foresee selling our company for, at $1 billion, $1 billion exit, right? That is how ambitious I am. Do I have any idea how I'm going to get there? Absolutely not. But am I tracking quarterly, monthly, yearly, how we're doing and pivoting? Absolutely. So changing that, creating more ambition, and then really going inside you, Seth, right? For everybody listening out there, go inside you and base the decisions that you make on how you want to live your life 1, 2, 3, 5 years from today. And that comes down to core values. Okay. I am all about family. I'm all about serving my community, my partners, right? And my people. My core values are growth and learning, excellence, right? And radical transparency and clarity. I got that one from Ray Dalio, by the way, right? So that's my new core values that I've added. Now I'm just always, you get the same George ever. I've always been that way, but now I've got the clarity to say, I'm always going to be radically transparent, but with enough professionalism and respect, right? Because you can always tell everybody, or whenever you're having a conversation, if you just hold things to yourself, then that's not transparency, right? So I always love the transparency aspect now. And then lastly, it's deeper purpose. Why am I doing this today? Core values, right? My family and my, my future. I want to be able to take care and launch a village in Peru for these kids that don't have homes, they're living in little chutes, and because I lived there. I lived in Peru and I lived in an adobe house. So part of my purpose, I lived it for 15 years, by the way, in Peru. I grew up very dirt poor. I was playing on the street. So now I see, as part of who I am, I've been there, I've struggled, and now I am clear on where I want to go and who I want to help.
Yeah, I love that. How did you find that purpose, right? How did you find that purpose, and kind of related to that, how did you develop those core values that are your North Star in business and in life? I mean, obviously you touched right there on your background and how you grew up, so feel free to go into that a little bit. But how was that all kind of developed and shaped your career and your life?
Yeah, absolutely, brother. The way I see things today are due to over 200 books, over I've spent over $180,000 in masterminds, coaching, right? So all those core values are just a subconscious absorption of the people who I'm surrounding myself with over the last 10 years. Because before, I wasn't thinking like that. I was selfish in a sense that it was just about me. And most people that don't do personal development, that don't develop inside themselves, that's how they are, right? And it's just not because they want to or they choose to. It's because that's how they grew up. So when I made the biggest change in my life is when I lost the first and biggest investment ever, and it was 2015 to 17. I had invested $300,000 as an LP into a venture, and I was doing very well with my marketing company. I was in marketing prior to hospitality. I was marketing hospitality, right, in the nightlife / event production in Houston, and I had saved quite a bit of money. I was 27 years old, and I invested into a nightclub, and it was someone else's deal. And 2 years later, the project went down. I had no idea we were in a lawsuit, and that lawsuit, the GP in the deal, had never told anyone. And they took the keys from us, and we lost a $1.3 billion venue that we had built, and we didn't know it until it was done, right? So that changed everything. It was just a knock on my face, right? I was down, I was broken, I was broke, and I had to start over from zero. This is 2017, and that's what shifted me to really go in on real estate. But the education that I went through, and the 3 years between 2017 and 2020, it is sort of when you're down, do you stay down or do you get up, stronger than ever? So that path of working 18 hours a day, every day for years, right? Building something out of absolutely nothing, right? Grinding yourself through having a portfolio, of short-term rentals. By 2020, I had 40, and now I've made them more experiential, right? And then during 2020, during the COVID time, I went and did something really different than anybody else, right? Everyone gets their education and they go out there and educate themselves and sort of change their mind and their subconscious, thinking because of that. But I went and did a program called Claim Your Power, okay? And Claim Your Power by Mastin Kipp, okay? Read that book if you are in a process of finding who you truly are and who you want to serve and your purpose. And it was just a book that had 40 chapters, and each chapter was a day, and it was all about how your heart felt about everything else. Not your mind. It wasn't changing your mind. It was changing your heart, right? After that, I had found that my purpose was connection with other people, okay? Connection with other people. So I thought back to what did I do for all these years? Well, I was in the hospitality industry. I was in the service industry. I was doing events. I was doing one-offs. I was doing weeklies, and I was always connected to people. So I have been living my purpose all along without even knowing it. So I'm here in 2020, right? It was a little tough for us as well, everybody, right? And we had a lot of units in downtown Houston, and there was nobody booking anything, right? And I was there in my apartment at the time, really finding what my purpose was. And I came out of that year stronger than ever to having my first 7-figure year in my business at $1.8 million in 2021. Okay. And what I discovered was that I truly needed to go back to what my purpose was. And that's what I'm living right now, right? Even though we are building a fund and an empire, and call it an empire, whatever it is, right? And that's what I like to think of. Not to brag or anything. But today, I get to live my purpose by connecting with people like you, right? Going to conferences, speaking on stages, just connecting on Zoom calls every day. That's part of my purpose, right? I don't want to be stuck in running operations. I know exactly what I'm great at. So understanding that, right, and who you are, what your unique ability is, and how you can help the world best is part of how you create that clarity to make that decision and come over any humps, right? So again, I am where I am because of all the deep thinking and deep understanding, and then that one book that changed my life in 2020.
I'll have to check that one out. I've not read that. But listen, I mean, I thought what was really critical there is that your purpose is not, I'm an STR empire builder, or, I'm an STR operator, or I am a fund manager. It's not a role or a career or, the title that you give yourself, right? Your purpose is connecting with people, and that covers everything. That doesn't matter what you do, right? If you're working in marketing, or you're in Peru doing some work over there, or you're in STR, or you're doing startups, like whatever you're doing, you can use that purpose still exists there. And I think that's really important for people to start kind of thinking about that, because I think a lot of us get caught up in, well, what's your purpose? Well, I'm a doctor. Okay. But that's not really your purpose. That's your title. That's your job. What's your purpose? Your purpose is probably the desire to help people, to help those in need, or whatever it might be, right? But it's not your job title. It's not your career. It's much bigger than that.
Way bigger. And connection could relate to many things, and you channel that energy with the people that you want to create relationships with, right? So right now, you and I are connecting, and we're creating a relationship, and I'm living my purpose because that's just what it is. And when I'm at a conference, man, you should see me geeking out for 10, 15 hours just talking to people. And you would think, George, you're spending a lot of times, right? You were there, right? So, yeah, man.
Yeah, I love it, man, because this is putting a little bit more kind of concrete to something that's typically, if you hear purpose, it feels a little, pie in the sky, up in the clouds. But this is actually concrete, right? It's connecting with people. It's generating and maintaining and building relationships. Like, that's something people can connect to. I love that, man. I've got to pivot a little bit because we didn't talk about it. A couple questions here. What is, you've mentioned experiential a couple times. What is experiential hospitality or short-term rentals? What does that even mean?
Experiential hospitality or short-term rentals is focusing your business model on being customer-centric or guest-centric. So you're creating experiences in your assets instead of creating the assets for cash flow, right? So which having an experiential short-term rental or boutique hotel or micro resort, which is what the 3 lanes that I would categorize myself being in, it's about how they feel when they get there, right? The amenities are part of that. The design is part of that, right? And that all, at the end of the day, ends up creating a better play or a better investment than just buying any type of property, furnishing it, and then putting it on your short-term rental platforms. So experience-driven and customer-centric business that focuses on the needs and emotional connection of those customers, again, connection, right? To whatever you're selling. This could relate to anything. Experiential, right? Could be experiential, an experiential law firm where you really focus on the customer piece, right? So it could be an experiential property management business where you do, right? You focus on the owner and the guest, right? So it's all about that one. So we've pivoted our business model from quantity to being very quality, experience driven, and that creates the revenue piece, which is the lag, the end result, right? So that's pretty much our business model, right? We create experiences.
That's great. That's great. What are you seeing? Because it sounds like you're in a few different lanes there, but all kind of in the hospitality boutique vein. What have you seen kind of change? Obviously, a lot of change from COVID, but now we're well past that now. Things have settled down. You're kind of seeing everything just kind of be where it should be. What are you seeing? I hear a lot of people talk about, STRs are dead. I know that's not true, but would love to get your opinion on that. I see a lot of people nowadays pushing boutique hotels more than Airbnbs. They'll say Airbnbs are dead, boutique hotels are where it's at. What's your opinion on all this? What are you seeing out there in the market right now?
Well, the industry's professionalizing. It's officially an asset class as of a few years ago, right? The industry's growing, right? And by 2030, I believe the stats show that, short-term rentals, vacation rentals are going to be a $300 billion industry across, worldwide. So when you have an industry, in my eyes, when you have an industry that is going from mom and pop to professional, then you have all the big players come in, right? And you have funds, you have professional operators. So then the people that don't level up their game, right, and put more thought and more passion and a better product out there into what they're doing, those are the ones that are saying Airbnb is dead, because maybe they bought wrong. They might not be investors. A lot of short-term rental operators have never invested in real estate. I invested in real estate. I did 80, 90 deals, and then I started doing short-term rentals, right? So then that's the big change, right? So you've got to understand that short-term rentals they're not new anymore, and they're way different. The supply in the United States is over 1.6, maybe 1.65 million. Vacation rentals in the U.S. when before 2020 it was right at 1 million. So you have 60% in 6 years, 7, maybe even less, 60% supply increase. While the demand is also increasing, but that's where the changes in some of these markets are, right? So, and what we look at before we invest, we have to do very in-depth market research from prior cycles, okay? So we have to understand, how did that market perform in terms of, the house price, housing prices, right? So we look at the home price index from 2007 to 12 before we go into a market. How did it perform then? Was there a big drop, right, in the median price? We look at the hospitality data to see if hotels, because there was no Airbnb data from 2007 to 12, how did the hotels and bars and restaurants perform? Was it a drastic curve? Usually when the real estate goes down drastically, you also have that. So we look for markets that are doing this. Recession, they go a little bit down and then they kind of ramp back up, and they stay flat for a year or two during a recession, which we're seeing that now, right? We are also sort of in that stabilization period after COVID, because it went way up in the short-term rental industry and real estate, and then things have stabilized. The markets that are winning right now are going to be those that are not your biggest major markets. They're going to be very specific, secondary, mountains, mid-sized towns. They're going to have the higher returns, higher cash flow, right? And now, if you go in there and implement a strategy like ours, right, which you're creating experiences, no matter what market you're in, you're going to win. But if you go into the markets where real estate has appreciated by 40%, right, because of printing money, our government printed billions of dollars. I don't even know exactly how many. I thought it was maybe 1 billion or 200 billion. I'm not sure exactly how many billions were printed. But if you're printing money like that, people are going to have money to invest into whatever they want, real estate, right? And if we go into markets that are, small, bigger actually, right, and then they have more supply, the real estate's going to be more expensive, right, and that's going to crush the returns. And then you have more competition. Regulations have a lot to play in there as well, right? So we look at different scenarios and we make decisions based on data, but also based on competition, right? These competitors, just because there's a lot of them, sometimes these mid-sized markets don't have the big players. They don't have professional operators. So that means they're about 5 years behind. So we have a window of at least 5, 7, or 10 years, right, to take advantage of those higher returns.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. I mean, it's a maturing market. I wouldn't say it's totally mature yet, but it's maturing, right? So you're going to have more competition. It's going to require more professionalism. The folks that inherited grandma's house and then just slapped it on Airbnb and were making cash flow, like those days are over, right? You've got to put some effort into this. You've got to be strategic about it. You've got to run it like a business. And I see parallels in capital raising too, right? Like we're past the days of in 2020 when you could just put any deal out there and you've got passive investors left and right and it's super easy to raise capital. we're past that now. You've got to be professional. You've got to get out there and actually meet people face to face, shake their hands. You got to put the effort into the relationships and build those relationships to build that trust with investors so that they'll invest with you and then continue to invest with you and give you referrals. It's just not that easy anymore. You've got to be professional because there's more competition, and that applies to any business out there, George.
I love it. Yep, and that's where the industry is, man. And if you're not leveling up, then that's why people are saying, right? And this business has a lot of mom and pop. Most operators have 1 to 3, max 5 units. Right?
For sure. George, it's been awesome, brother. Where can our listeners find out more about you?
Well, social media. I've got a social media website. It's georgesalas360.com. That has all my social medias. We can connect there. And if you guys want to check out some of our investments, our empresscapitalgroup.com. But Seth, thank you very much for having me, brother. Great conversation, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you, brother. Talk soon. Whoa, what an incredible conversation with my boy, George Salas. All right, builders, that's a wrap. If George's story hit you hard, which it did for me, from growing up with nothing in Peru to self-educating, reading so many books, spending over $100,000 in masterminds and self-education, to taking massive action in launching a fund and building a $25 million short-term rental portfolio. That's exactly the kind of conversation we built this show for. So do me a favor, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's the best way to help us keep bringing guests like George and delivering content that actually raises the bar. Check out the show notes to connect with George and learn more about Empress Capital. Check out my website, SethBradleyESQ.com, to see what I'm up to and see if I can help you on your journey to becoming the great entrepreneur that you're built to be. And as always, enjoy the journey and raise the bar. Thanks for tuning in to Raise the Bar Radio. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Keep pushing, keep building, and keep raising the bar. Until next time, enjoy the journey.